The screaming started at 2:47 a.m., and Jake Morrison knew immediately it wasn't coming from his 7-year-old daughter's room. Living in a converted warehouse complex in downtown Denver had its perks, cheap rent being the main one, but the paper-thin walls meant every neighbor's crisis became your own. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Jake rolled out of bed, his special forces instincts still sharp after 3 years of civilian life, and moved silently toward the window overlooking the alley. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 men were dragging a young woman toward a black van, her expensive clothes torn, her mouth covered with duct tape. She couldn't have been older than 22, and the terror in her eyes reminded him of every hostage situation he'd faced in Afghanistan. The men moved with practiced efficiency, clearly not amateurs. Jake's hand instinctively reached for his phone, but something stopped him. By the time police arrived, she'd be gone, probably forever. He had maybe 90 seconds to make a choice that would change everything. Jake Morrison's alarm hadn't gone off yet when the commotion in the alley jolted him awake. 3 years of fixing air conditioning units in Denver office buildings had dulled some of his edge, but not his ability to assess a threat in seconds. The young woman being forced into the van was fighting hard, her designer heels scraping against the asphalt as she tried to dig in her feet. The men handling her wore dark clothing and moved like professionals, which told Jake everything he needed to know about what he was witnessing. His daughter Lily was still asleep in the next room, her soft breathing barely audible through the thin walls of their converted loft apartment. At 8 years old, she'd already been through enough upheaval losing her mother 2 years ago to cancer, then watching her father struggle to rebuild their life from nothing. Last thing she needed was her dad getting involved in something dangerous, but as Jake watched the woman's desperate struggle, he couldn't shake the image of Lily at that age, helpless and afraid. The decision made itself. Jake grabbed his jeans and the tactical knife he still kept in his nightstand drawer, old habits from his army days that his late wife Sarah used to tease him about. He'd spent 8 years in special operations, including 2 tours in the Middle East, before trading his uniform for civilian clothes and a steady paycheck. The transition hadn't been easy, especially after Sarah's diagnosis, but he'd thought those days of split-second life-or-death decisions were behind him. Moving with the silent precision that had kept him alive in hostile territory, Jake slipped out of his apartment and down the fire escape. The men were having trouble getting the woman into the van, her resistance buying him precious time. Through the narrow alley window, he could see one of them pulling out what looked like a syringe. Once they drugged her, she'd be gone forever, another statistic in a system that rarely brought missing persons home alive. Jake approached from the blind spot he'd identified, using the shadows cast by the loading dock to mask his movement. The closest man was focused entirely on restraining the victim, completely unaware of the threat approaching from his 6 o'clock. When Jake struck, it was with the brutal efficiency his instructors had drilled into him during selection training. A precise blow to the carotid artery dropped the first man silently, his body crumpling to the asphalt before his partners realized what was happening. The second man spun around, reaching for something inside his jacket, but Jake was already moving. Years of hand-to-hand combat training took over as he closed the distance, his muscle memory executing techniques he'd practiced thousands of times. Within seconds, 2 men lay unconscious in the alley while the third, the apparent leader, backed toward the van with his hands raised. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The young woman had collapsed against a dumpster, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she stared at Jake with a mixture of terror and hope. Her expensive clothing was torn, her makeup smeared, but her eyes held an intelligence that told him she understood exactly how close she'd come to disappearing forever. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but the gratitude in it hit him harder than any enemy fire he'd ever faced. "Thank you," she managed, pulling the duct tape from her mouth with trembling fingers. "I'm Maya Chen. My father is Robert Chen. He owns Chen Dynamics. Please, you have to help me get home." Jake's truck rumbled through the empty streets of Denver's industrial district as Maya Chen sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her designer dress torn and her hands still trembling from the encounter. The dashboard clock read 3:24 a.m., and Jake knew they had maybe an hour before the city started waking up and the streets filled with potential witnesses or threats. His mind raced through options, discarding each location as too exposed, Too predictable or too dangerous for what was clearly an ongoing situation. "We can't go to a hotel," he said, more to himself than to Maya. "They'll have your credit cards flagged. Facial recognition software running at every major chain. Police stations are compromised if this operation is as sophisticated as it appears." Maya looked at him with growing alarm, the reality of her situation sinking in deeper with each passing minute. She'd lived her entire 23 years insulated by wealth and security, never imagining she could become this vulnerable. "What about my father's security team?" she asked, her voice gaining strength as the immediate shock began to wear off. "He has former FBI agents, corporate protection specialists. They have safe houses, secure communications." Jake shook his head, his expression grim as he navigated through a maze of side streets, checking his mirrors constantly for signs of pursuit. "If they knew your routine well enough to grab you from a charity gala, they've done their homework on your family's security protocols too. Professional kidnapping rings don't operate in isolation. They have inside information, corrupt contacts, ways of monitoring official channels." He pulled into an all-night diner parking lot, the neon sign flickering weakly in the pre-dawn darkness. "We need to assume everyone in your normal circle is potentially compromised until we know otherwise." The diner was nearly empty except for a lone trucker nursing coffee at the counter and a waitress who looked like she'd been working the graveyard shift for decades. Jake chose a booth in the back corner, positioning himself where he could watch both entrances while keeping Maya out of sight from the street-facing windows. She slid into the worn vinyl seat across from him, her posture still rigid with stress and disbelief. "I don't understand any of this," Maya said, accepting the cup of coffee Jake ordered for her, with hands that had finally stopped shaking. "My father's company does aerospace engineering, defense contracts. We're not involved in anything that would attract this kind of attention." She paused, studying Jake's weathered face in the fluorescent lighting. "You handled those men like you'd done it before. Military?" Jake nodded, wrapping his hands around his own coffee mug. "Army Special Forces, 8 years. 2 deployments in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. I specialized in hostage rescue and counter-terrorism operations." He met her eyes directly. "What you experienced tonight wasn't random street crime, Maya. This was a coordinated professional abduction with multiple teams, surveillance, and inside intelligence. Someone wanted you specifically, probably for leverage against your father or his company." The weight of his words settled over Maya like a physical burden. She'd grown up understanding that wealth came with certain risks, but her father's security team had always made those threats seem abstract, theoretical. Sitting in a dingy all-night diner with a stranger who'd literally saved her life made the dangers suddenly, terrifyingly real. "So, what do we do?" she asked, her business school training kicking in as she forced herself to think strategically rather than emotionally. "If we can't trust normal channels, if they have inside information, how do we get me back to safety?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering options and calculating risks with the methodical approach that had kept him alive in combat zones. "I have a place," he said finally. "It's not much, but it's completely off the grid. No official records, no electronic surveillance, no connection to either of our normal lives. We can hole up there while we figure out who's behind this and what they want." Maya felt a chill of fear, mixed with an unexpected sense of relief. Despite the bizarre circumstances, something about Jake Morrison's calm competence made her feel safer than she had since leaving the charity gala. "Where?" she asked. Jake hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the personal revelation he was about to make. "My late wife inherited a cabin from her grandfather. It's about 90 miles northeast of here, up in the mountains near Netherland. No utilities except a generator, no internet, no cell service. The property title is still in her maiden name, and I've never registered it with any government agency." The mention of his wife brought a shadow of pain across Jake's features that Maya didn't miss. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. "How long ago?" Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 2 years. Cancer. She fought it for 18 months before. He didn't finish the sentence, but Maya understood. The grief in his eyes told her everything she needed to know about what this man had endured. "You have a daughter," Maya said, remembering something he'd mentioned earlier. "Won't she be worried if you don't come home?" Jake's expression shifted to one of deep concern mixed with determination. "Lily is 8. She's staying with my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez tonight because I had to work a double shift yesterday. I'll call her in the morning. Tell her I got called out on an emergency repair job. She's used to my unpredictable schedule." Maya felt a stab of guilt at the casual way Jake discussed disrupting his life to protect a complete stranger. "I can't ask you to do this," she said. "You have responsibilities. A child who needs you. My father can pay you whatever compensation you think is fair, but you shouldn't risk your life or your daughter's stability for someone you don't even know." Jake leaned back in the booth, studying Maya's face with the analytical gaze he'd once used to assess potential threats in hostile territory. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. "My wife, Sarah. She had the same way of trying to shoulder responsibility for everyone around her, even when she was the one who needed help." He took a sip of his coffee, his expression distant with memory. Sarah was a social worker. She spent her career helping people who couldn't help themselves, fighting systems that were stacked against them. When she got sick, she kept trying to manage her own care, coordinate her own treatment, make sure everyone else was okay. She couldn't just let people take care of her, even when she was dying. Maya felt tears stinging her eyes at the raw honesty in Jake's voice. "The night she died, she made me promise something," Jake continued. "She said life gives us opportunities to make a difference, to be the person someone needs when they have nowhere else to turn. She made me swear that if I ever had the chance to help someone the way she helped people, I wouldn't let my own fears or limitations stop me." He looked directly at Maya, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You're that opportunity, Maya. Those men tonight weren't going to hold you for ransom. They were going to make you disappear, and your father would have spent the rest of his life wondering what happened to his daughter. I've seen what that kind of loss does to a person. I won't let it happen if I can prevent it." Maya felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition of the profound decency that existed in Jake Morrison, despite the violence he was capable of. She'd grown up surrounded by people who helped others primarily when it served their own interests, where every favor came with expectations and strings attached. The idea that a stranger would risk everything simply because it was the right thing to do was almost incomprehensible to her privileged worldview. "What about your daughter's safety?" Maya asked. "If these people are as dangerous as you say, won't helping me put Lily at risk?" Jake had already considered this angle, his father's instincts warring with his soldier's training. "The cabin is completely isolated. No neighbors, no casual visitors, no way for anyone to accidentally stumble across us. Lily will be safer with Mrs. Rodriguez for a few days than she would be if these people decide I'm a loose end that needs to be eliminated." The brutal practicality of Jake's assessment sent another chill through Maya. She was beginning to understand that her rescue had put Jake in almost as much danger as she'd been in originally. The men who'd tried to abduct her would want revenge, or at minimum would need to silence the witness who could identify them. By helping her, Jake had made himself and his daughter targets. "I'm sorry," Maya whispered, the full weight of the situation crushing down on her. "I'm so sorry for dragging you into this. If something happens to you or Lily because of me—" Jake reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, the contact surprisingly gentle from someone who displayed such lethal efficiency just hours earlier. "Nothing is going to happen to Lily," he said with absolute conviction. "And nothing is going to happen to you. We're going to figure out who wants you and why. We're going to make sure they can't hurt you or anyone else. And then we're going to get you back to your life safely. That's a promise." Maya looked into Jake Morrison's eyes and saw something she'd rarely encountered in her world of corporate executives and social elites, a man whose word was literally his bond, who would die before breaking a promise to protect someone under his care. For the first time since the nightmare began, she allowed herself to believe that survival was possible. The mountain cabin sat nestled among towering pines at an elevation where snow still clung to the shadowed slopes despite the late spring weather. Jake's truck labored up the winding dirt road, its engine straining against the altitude and grade, as Maya stared out at the wilderness surrounding them. She'd never been anywhere so remote, so completely disconnected from the digital infrastructure that defined her normal existence. No cell towers, no internet cables, no surveillance cameras watching from every corner. For someone who'd lived her entire life monitored and protected, the isolation felt both terrifying and oddly liberating. The cabin itself was smaller than Maya had expected, a modest log structure with a stone chimney and a wraparound porch that had seen better decades. Jake parked beside a rusted generator housing and killed the engine, the sudden silence almost overwhelming after hours of road noise and mechanical vibration. Maya could hear wind through the pine branches, the distant call of some mountain bird, and nothing else. No traffic, no sirens, no urban hum of civilization grinding forward relentlessly. "It's not the Ritz," Jake said, shouldering a duffel bag he'd grabbed from his apartment before they left Denver. "But Sarah's grandfather built it to last. Solid foundation, good roof, propane for heat and cooking. We can stay here as long as necessary." Maya followed him up the wooden steps, noting how Jake's demeanor had shifted since their arrival. His shoulders relaxed slightly, his constant surveillance of their surroundings becoming less aggressive. This place represented safety to him, sanctuary in a way that resonated deeper than mere tactical advantage. Inside, the cabin was sparse but functional. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by built-in bookshelves filled with paperback novels and outdoor survival guides. The kitchen consisted of basic appliances running on propane, a hand pump for well water, and open shelving stocked with canned goods that looked like they'd been there since Jake's wife was alive. Maya found herself studying a framed photograph on the mantel, a beautiful woman with kind eyes holding a toddler version of the daughter Jake had mentioned. "That's Sarah and Lily," Jake said quietly, following her gaze, taken about 6 months before Sarah got her diagnosis. Lily doesn't remember her mother being healthy, just the hospitals and treatments and gradual decline. "Sometimes I think that's a blessing, sometimes I think it's the cruelest thing imaginable." Maya felt the weight of grief in his words, the kind of loss that reshapes a person's entire understanding of what matters in life. "She's beautiful," Maya said, meaning both the woman and the child. "Lily has her mother's eyes." Jake nodded, his expression distant with memory. "Sarah would have liked you. She had a talent for seeing through people's circumstances to who they really were underneath. She would have said you're stronger than you know, that surviving what happened tonight proves you have courage you haven't discovered yet." Maya settled into a worn armchair near the fireplace while Jake moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, checking propane levels and testing the manual water pump. "How often do you come here?" she asked, watching him work. The familiarity of his movements suggested this wasn't his first visit since his wife's death, despite what he'd implied earlier. "More than I probably should," Jake admitted, striking a match to light the propane heater. "When civilian life gets too overwhelming, when I can't sleep because of nightmares, when I need to remember who I used to be before everything went wrong. Lily thinks I come here to hunt or fish, and sometimes I do, but mostly I come here to talk to Sarah." He paused, seeming to realize how that sounded. "I know she's not here, not really. But this place holds memories of her that haven't been contaminated by hospitals and sickness and death." Maya understood completely. The cabin represented a version of Jake's life that existed before tragedy struck, a time when his future had seemed predictable and secure. She'd never experienced that kind of loss, but she recognized the need for sanctuary, for a place where the world's demands couldn't reach. Her own version had been her mother's art studio, preserved exactly as it was when Maya was 12, before corporate responsibilities and social expectations had consumed her family's life. They spent the rest of the morning settling into an uneasy routine. Jake maintained his vigilance, periodically checking the perimeter and monitoring the single road that provided access to the property. Maya tried to make herself useful, helping with meal preparation and learning to operate the manual systems that kept the cabin functional. The domestic normalcy felt surreal given the circumstances, but it also provided a necessary distraction from the magnitude of what had happened. It was Maya's idea to try calling her father from the old landline phone Jake discovered in a bedroom closet. The phone ran on copper wires that hadn't been updated since the 1980s, making it impossible for anyone to monitor digitally. Robert Chen answered on the second ring, his voice tight with barely controlled panic and rage. "Maya? Thank God, where are you? The FBI is here. My security team is mobilizing. We have every resource in the company focused on finding you." Maya closed her eyes, hearing the desperation in her father's voice. Despite their complicated relationship, despite years of feeling like a disappointment to his expectations, she'd never doubted that he loved her completely. "Dad, I'm safe. I can't tell you where I am, but I'm with someone who saved my life. The people who took me, they're not ordinary kidnappers. They knew too much about my schedule, my security protocols." She paused, knowing what she was about to say would devastate him. "Dad, I think someone inside our organization helped them." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Robert's chin finally spoke, his voice carried the sullen, cold fury of a man who'd built an empire from nothing and wouldn't tolerate betrayal. "Who? Give me names, Maya!" "I'll have them arrested within the hour." Maya looked at Jake, who was listening intently to both sides of the conversation. "We don't know yet. But Dad, you have to be careful who you trust. Don't use normal security channels. Don't follow standard protocols. Whoever is behind this has been planning it for months, maybe years." Jake gestured for the phone, and Maya handed it over reluctantly. "Mr. Chen, this is Jake Morrison. I'm the one who intervened when your daughter was being abducted. I need you to listen very carefully because your daughter's life may depend on how you handle the next few hours." Jake's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to briefing senior officers in crisis situations. "Who are you? What are your qualifications? Why should I trust my daughter's safety to a complete stranger?" Robert Chen's questions came rapid fire, the successful executive demanding information and credentials. Jake understood the impulse completely. If someone had taken Lily, he'd want to interrogate every person involved in her rescue. "I'm former Army Special Forces with 8 years of experience in hostage rescue and counterterrorism. I've kept your daughter alive for the past 18 hours when professional kidnappers were actively hunting her. Right now, I'm the only person in this situation who doesn't have divided loyalties or conflicted interests." Jake's tone remained respectful but firm. "Sir, with respect, your daughter is safest exactly where she is until we identify who inside your organization provided intelligence to her attackers." The conversation that followed revealed the scope of the conspiracy Maya had unwittingly stumbled into. Chen Dynamics had recently secured a classified defense contract worth over $2 billion, developing next-generation radar systems for the military. The technology involved had applications beyond aerospace, including surveillance capabilities that certain foreign governments would pay extraordinary amounts to acquire. Maya's kidnapping wasn't about ransom money. It was about leverage to force her father to provide access to classified technology that could compromise national security. "They wanted me as a bargaining chip," Maya realized, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Not money, not traditional ransom, but cooperation with technology transfer. "Dad, how many people knew about the classified contract?" Robert's answer confirmed Jake's worst fears. The project involved dozens of employees, multiple subcontractors, and several government oversight agencies. Any one of them could have provided the intelligence that made Maya's abduction possible. Jake ended the phone call with explicit instructions for Robert Chen to maintain normal business operations while secretly investigating his own organization for security breaches. They established a communication protocol using the cabin's landline for daily check-ins. But Jake made it clear that Maya would remain hidden until they identified and neutralized the threat. What none of them realized was that the old landline, despite being analog technology, still ran through switching stations that could be monitored by anyone with the right equipment and government connections. Within 6 hours of the phone call, black SUVs were winding their way up the mountain road toward the cabin, carrying men who had authorization to retrieve Maya Chen by any means necessary. Jake spotted the vehicles first, their urban appearance completely out of place in the mountain wilderness. His military training kicked in immediately as he assessed the tactical situation. 3 SUVs meant at least 12 operatives, probably more. The cabin's remote location, which had seemed like an advantage, now became a trap. No neighbors to call for help, no police patrol routes, no casual traffic to witness whatever was about to happen. "Maya, we have company," Jake said, his voice deadly calm as he moved to the gun cabinet Sarah's grandfather had installed decades earlier. "These aren't the same amateurs from the alley. This is a professional team with serious resources." Maya felt her blood turn to ice as she watched Jake load a hunting rifle with movements so practiced they seemed automatic. "How did they find us?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Jake's expression was grim as he handed her a satellite phone from his emergency supplies. "Someone with access to telecommunications infrastructure tracked the landline call to your father." This was never about random kidnappers, Maya. This is about people with government connections, unlimited resources, and authorization to operate outside normal legal constraints. Jake moved to the window, studying the approaching vehicles through tactical binoculars. "What do we do?" Maya asked, forcing herself to remain calm despite the terror clawing at her throat. Jake's answer chilled her to the bone. "We survive. And then we make sure they never threaten you or anyone else again." The firefight lasted 17 minutes, but to Maya it felt like hours. Jake had positioned her in the cabin's root cellar, a stone-lined chamber beneath the kitchen floorboards that Sarah's grandfather had built during the Cold War. From her hiding place, she could hear the sharp crack of rifle fire, the splintering of wood as bullets punched through the cabin walls, and Jake's calm voice calling out tactical information to himself as he moved between defensive positions. When the shooting finally stopped, the silence that followed was more terrifying than the violence had been. Maya pressed her ear to the cellar ceiling, straining to hear any sign that Jake had survived the assault. After what felt like an eternity, the wooden trap door above her head creaked open, and Jake's face appeared in the opening, streaked with dirt and blood from a grazing wound across his left temple. "It's over," he said simply, extending his hand to help her climb out of the cellar. Maya emerged to find the cabin's interior destroyed, furniture overturned and walls riddled with bullet holes. Through the shattered windows, she could see 3 motionless figures in tactical gear scattered around the property. Jake had fought off an entire team of professional operatives using nothing but hunting rifles and the tactical advantages he'd gained from years of combat experience. "Are they all?" Maya couldn't finish the question, but Jake understood. His expression was grimmer than she'd ever seen it, the weight of what he'd been forced to do evident in every line of his face. "Dead or neutralized." But Maya, this changes everything. These weren't criminals or foreign agents. They were carrying federal identification, sophisticated communications equipment, and weapons that aren't available to civilian contractors. The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. "You're saying our own government was involved in trying to kidnap me?" Jake nodded, his jaw tight with anger and disgust. "Someone with significant authority wanted you taken, probably to pressure your father into cooperating with technology transfer. When that failed, they escalated to direct action. The men I just killed were probably told they were on a legitimate national security operation." Maya sank onto the one piece of furniture that had survived the gunfight intact, a heavy wooden chair that bore several fresh bullet scars. "What happens now? If government agents are involved, we can't go to the FBI. We can't trust normal legal channels. How do we prove what really happened when the people investigating are probably part of the conspiracy?" Jake was already moving around the cabin, gathering essential supplies and erasing evidence of their presence. "We don't. We disappear, separately, and we never contact each other again. It's the only way to keep both of us alive." The finality in his voice made Maya's stomach clench with something that went beyond fear. "You're abandoning me?" she asked, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "After everything we've been through, you're just gonna walk away and pretend this never happened?" Jake stopped packing and turned to face her, his expression more pained than she'd ever seen it. "Maya, I just killed federal agents on American soil. Even if they were corrupt, even if they were operating outside legal authority, I'm now a wanted man. Every law enforcement agency in the country will be hunting me within hours. Staying with you means putting you in more danger, not less." His voice cracked slightly as he continued. "And it means putting Lily in danger too. I can't have my daughter's life destroyed because her father got involved in something this big." The mention of his daughter brought Maya's own priorities into sharp focus. Despite the connection she'd felt to Jake over the past few days, despite the way he'd protected her and made her feel safer than she'd ever felt in her life, she couldn't ask him to sacrifice his child's future for her sake. The realization that their brief time together was ending felt like losing something precious before she'd fully understood its value. "Where will you go?" Maya asked, watching Jake methodically pack the few belongings he'd brought to the cabin. "How will you and Lily survive if you're fugitives?" Jake's smile was sad but determined. "I have contacts from my military days, people who understand that sometimes good soldiers get put in impossible situations. There are ways to disappear. New identities, cash networks, that operate outside official banking systems. Lily and I will be fine, eventually." Maya felt tears stinging her eyes as the reality of their separation hit her fully. "I don't even know how to thank you for what you've done. You saved my life, risked everything to protect me, and now you're losing your home, your identity, your entire future because of me." Jake finished packing and moved to kneel in front of her chair, taking her hands in his own. "Maya, meeting you reminded me of something I'd forgotten since Sarah died. That there are still people in this world worth fighting for, worth taking risks to protect. You didn't ask for any of this to happen, but the way you've handled it, the courage you've shown, the concern you've had for me and Lily even when your own life was in danger, that tells me everything I need to know about who you really are underneath all the corporate executive facade." Maya squeezed his hands, memorizing the callous texture of his palms, the warmth of his touch, the steady strength that had been her anchor through the most terrifying experience of her life. "What about your wife's cabin? All these memories of Sarah?" Jake glanced around the destroyed interior, his expression philosophical rather than bitter. Sarah would understand. She always said that places are just collections of wood and stone, that the real memories live inside us. Besides, this cabin served its purpose. It kept us safe long enough to figure out what we were really dealing with. He stood up, shouldering his pack with military precision. "Maya, I need you to promise me something. When you get back to your normal life, don't let this experience make you smaller or more afraid. Use what you've learned about your own strength, about what really matters. Build something better than what you had before." The satellite phone Jake had given her earlier buzzed with an incoming call from her father's emergency number. The conversation that followed was tense and complicated, with Robert Chen coordinating a pickup location where Maya could be retrieved safely while Jake disappeared into the wilderness using hiking trails that wouldn't leave electronic traces. The logistics of their separation were handled with the same tactical precision Jake had applied to protecting her, but Maya felt like part of her soul was being surgically removed. 3 months later, Maya stood in the boardroom of Chen Dynamics, presenting a quarterly report to investors and government oversight officials. The kidnapping attempt had been officially classified as a terrorist incident involving foreign agents, the dead federal agents explained as heroes who had died rescuing her from a remote location. The truth of what had really happened was buried under layers of classified documentation and national security restrictions. Maya had returned to her corporate responsibilities with a vengeance, throwing herself into work with an intensity that impressed even her demanding father. But something fundamental had changed in her approach to business and life. The woman who had once measured success purely in terms of profit margins and market dominance now found herself asking different questions about the purpose and impact of her family's company. She'd established a private foundation focused on supporting veterans and their families, particularly those who had been forced to start over after serving their country in morally complex situations. The foundation operated with complete anonymity for its beneficiaries, providing financial support and new identity assistance without requiring explanation or justification. Maya told herself it was about giving back to the military community, but she knew it was really about hoping that somewhere, Jake and Lily were among the people being helped. Meanwhile, in a small coastal town in Oregon, Jake Morrison lived under a new name, working as a charter boat captain, while 8-year-old Lily attended elementary school and made friends who knew nothing about their previous life. The transition had been difficult, requiring them to leave behind everyone and everything they'd known, but Jake had managed to create a stable, normal existence for his daughter. The nightmares had returned with a vengeance after the cabin incident. Not just the old combat dreams from Afghanistan, but new ones featuring Maya's terrified face and the sound of federal agents dying at a firefight he'd never wanted. Jake found himself thinking about her constantly, wondering if she'd survived the return to her corporate world, whether she'd been able to integrate the lessons she'd learned about her own strength and resilience. He'd kept the satellite phone, though he'd never used it to contact her. Sometimes late at night, when Lily was asleep and the Oregon coast was quiet except for the sound of waves, Jake would hold the phone and imagine calling Maya's number. He'd compose entire conversations in his mind, telling her about Lily's progress in school, about the charter boat business he was building, about the way sunrise looked over the Pacific Ocean from their small apartment above the marina. But he never made the call. The rational part of his mind understood that any contact between them increased the risk of discovery for both of them. Maya had returned to a world of wealth and privilege where she could afford the best security and legal protection. Jake's world was smaller, more vulnerable, dependent on anonymity and careful attention to operational security. Lily had adapted to their new life with the resilience of childhood. But Jake could see that she missed the familiar routines of their old existence. She asked occasionally about their friends in Denver, about Mrs. Rodriguez who had helped care for her, about the cabin where her mother's memories seemed most vivid. Jake answered her questions honestly while being careful not to reveal the danger that had forced their relocation. The little girl had no idea that her father had become a hero to someone, that he'd saved a woman's life and potentially prevented the theft of classified technology that could have compromised national security. She knew only that they'd moved for her father's work, and that their new life by the ocean was different, but not necessarily worse than what they'd left behind. Both Jake and Maya carried forward the changes that their brief but intense connection had created in their fundamental understanding of what mattered most in life. For Jake, it was the recognition that his protective instincts and combat skills could still serve a noble purpose even in civilian life. For Maya, it was the knowledge that she possessed reservoirs of courage and resilience she'd never known existed. Neither of them could have predicted that their paths would cross again, or that the separation they both believed was permanent would prove to be only a pause in a story that was far from over. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who disappeared before Jake could ask any questions. Inside the unmarked envelope was a single sheet of expensive stationery with Maya's personal letterhead and handwriting he recognized, despite the months that had passed since their separation. "Jake, I know you told me never to contact you, but circumstances have changed. My father is dying, and before he goes, he wants to meet the man who saved his daughter's life. More importantly, there's something I need to tell you about what happened after we parted ways. The foundation I established has been tracking the people responsible for the conspiracy against my family. We found them, all of them, and they're no longer a threat to anyone. You're not a fugitive anymore." The charges were quietly dropped when the real story came to light through congressional investigation. "If you're willing, I'd like to see you again. There's a debt that needs to be repaid, and a conversation we never got to finish. Maya." Jake read the letter 3 times before the implications fully registered. The careful life he'd built in Oregon, the new identity, the constant vigilance, none of it was necessary anymore. He was free to reclaim his real name, to give Lily back her original identity, to stop running from shadows that no longer existed. The meeting took place at Robert Chen's private estate outside Denver, a sprawling compound that spoke of wealth accumulated over decades of successful business ventures. Maya met Jake and Lily at the front gate, her appearance more polished than he remembered, but her smile genuine and warm as she knelt down to Lily's level. "You must be Lily," Maya said softly. "Your father told me so much about you." "I'm Maya, and I'm very grateful to know such a brave little girl." Lily, now 9 years old and curious about everything, studied Maya with the direct gaze children use when deciding whether adults are trustworthy. "Dad says you're the reason we had to move to Oregon," Lily said matter-of-factly. "But he also says you're a good person who was in trouble and needed help. Are you not in trouble anymore?" Maya glanced at Jake, seeing approval in his eyes for his daughter's straightforward approach to complicated adult situations. "No, sweetheart, I'm not in trouble anymore. And because your father helped me when I needed it most, I want to help both of you now." Maya stood and faced Jake directly. "My father is establishing a private security consulting firm. It's designed specifically for military veterans who have the skills and experience to protect people who can't protect themselves. He wants you to run it." Jake felt his world shifting again, but this time toward possibility rather than away from it. "Maya, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not looking for charity or handouts." Lily and I are doing fine on our own." Maya's expression didn't change, but Jake caught the hint of a smile she was trying to suppress. "It's not charity, Jake. It's a business proposition. The firm will handle security for corporate executives, government officials, and private citizens who face legitimate threats. You'd be training other veterans, developing security protocols, and yes, occasionally doing fieldwork when situations require your specific expertise." She paused, her voice becoming more personal. "My father researched your military record. 8 years of exemplary service, multiple commendations, specialized training that makes you uniquely qualified for this kind of work. He's not offering you a job out of gratitude. He's offering you a career because you're the best person for it." The conversation with Robert Chen that followed was unlike any job interview Jake had ever experienced. The older man, clearly fighting the cancer that was slowly claiming his life, spoke with the directness of someone who had no time for social pleasantries or corporate double talk. "Mr. Morrison, my daughter is alive because you were willing to risk everything to protect a stranger. That kind of integrity is exactly what this company needs to build its reputation and serve its clients effectively." Robert's handshake was still firm despite his illness. "The starting salary is $400,000 annually, plus equity participation and performance bonuses. Maya will be your primary business partner, handling client relations and strategic planning while you manage operations and training." 6 months later, Morrison Security Solutions had grown from a startup concept to a thriving business with offices in 3 states and a waiting list of potential clients. Jake found himself doing work that combined his military expertise with his natural protective instincts, while Lily thrived in Denver's excellent school system and formed friendships that didn't require constant relocation. Maya had become a constant presence in their lives, not just as a business partner, but as someone who understood the unique challenges of Jake's situation as a single father building a new career. Her relationship with Lily had evolved naturally, without forced attempts at replacement or competition with Sarah's memory. On a quiet Sunday evening, as Maya helped Lily with a school project while Jake prepared dinner in their new house, he reflected on the unexpected turns his life had taken. The woman he'd saved from kidnappers had ultimately saved him as well, not just from legal prosecution but from a future of limitation and fear. "Dad," Lily called from the dining room table where she was working on her assignment. "Maya says her company is helping build schools for kids whose parents are in the military. Can we visit one of them?" Jake looked at Maya, seeing the contentment in her expression as she helped his daughter with her homework. "We can do whatever you want, kiddo," Jake replied, realizing that for the first time since Sarah's death, the future felt full of possibilities rather than obstacles. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.